Hello and welcome to Magic Concepts, a series where we explore different concepts of Magic the Gathering, starting from zero knowledge in the game and going all the way up through Pro Tour level strategies. Our last two videos have been over the concepts of tempo and card advantage. And so now that we know what both of those are, now we can look at creating a balance between them while building our decks. So generally, these tempo versus card advantage are competing theories. So when you're focusing on tempo in your deck, you're looking to increase your board state. You're looking to take the initiative, be aggressive with your plays, keep your opponent on the defensive, and push your advantage by removing blockers off the board. Generally, these utilize swarm strategies or hasty creatures to get the job done. Whereas card advantage, you tend to play a more defensive game naturally. Your focus is on drawing more cards, possibly even forcing your opponent to discard, and blanking your opponent's cards, using different advantage engines to cycle dead cards, and looking to maneuver yourself into advantageous 2-for-1 exchanges. Now, if these two things fall behind, very different things happen. If you fall behind on tempo, that can lead to bad blocks, or possibly no blocks at all if you need to keep your creatures alive. And it can be some very reactive plays, which a tempo strategy is not going to be able to handle very well. Whereas if you fall behind on card advantage, that's going to leave you with a lack of options. Very often, you will end up with an empty hand and be left to the mercy of your deck. And if you can put cards in your deck that kind of blend these two strategies, you can help shore up those weak spots. For example, Jaya, Fiery Negotiator, her +1 will create Monk Prowess tokens that can help put you on the board and increase your tempo. Her -1, exile the top 2 cards. You can play that card this turn. That gives you another source of card advantage that doesn't even use your hand. So even if you are empty-handed, Jaya can still give you more options to play so that you're not at the mercy of your deck. So when you're looking to combine tempo and card advantage into one deck, you really need to think of Magic as a game in 2 stages. So stage 1, the early game, you generally will have a lot of cards in hand. So this is like turn 1, you've got 7 cards, but you have very limited mana. You only have 1 land per turn. So this is where the board race happens. This is where you want to play low-cost creatures like Monastery Swiftspear to get on the board fast, because that initial tempo can lead to a big advantage later on down the game. So the tempo early game, you are looking to get ahead on board. You want to come out fast, you want to force your opponent to react, and you really want to push your tempo advantages. Any early damage can lead to a late game victory, because that one last point of damage is often all it takes. And if you can push that in on turn 1 when your opponent's not expecting it, versus turn 20 when they're really regarding their life total, it's a lot easier to push through early damage. So that early tempo can sometimes be converted into card advantage through the use of token producers, like Third Path Iconoclast, because now your opponent has to deal with 2 cards, Iconoclast and the tokens that he produces. And then later on in the game, even if the major threats like Zephyr Singer does get removed, the damage at that point has been done, because through her Convoke ability, now all of your stuff has flying, even after the Singer leaves the battlefield. So your Iconoclast has flying, the token he produced has flying, and all this stuff is now a major threat that your opponent has to deal with, even after the big threat in Singer has been removed. And that's when we start transitioning from our early game into our late game. So in stage 2, your lands have been played, your opening spells have been cast, the tempo on the board is what it is. In stage 2, you now have more mana because you've played all your lands for the first few turns, but now you have less things to do with it. Your hand has been pretty much emptied through your early tempo plays. At this stage in the game, gaining tempo becomes a lot harder. And identifying which stage of the game you're in is going to help you decide how to play your cards. So Playing Chrome Host Seed Shark on turn 3 is a great tempo play. From then on, anytime you cast a non-creature spell, you will get a incubator token that can then transform into a Phyrexian creature. However, it costs mana to transform those creatures. So if you are still in an early game stage, spending the mana to transform those creatures might not be the best idea if you are still looking to push tempo through cards in hand. Whereas in the late game, when you have more mana than cards, using these Phyrexian tokens as a mana sink can definitely help create tempo on the board without having to expend cards from your hand. So in the late game, mana is no longer a limitation, but the number of cards in hand is. So that's why incorporating cards in your hand that let you draw as well become a lot more important. A card like Zhalfirin Shapecraft that has its effect, but then also lets you draw a card or replace itself, is what we call a cantrip in Magic. You might know this term if you've ever played Dungeons & Dragons. It's often a 0 level spell that costs very little resources to cast and can generally be cast almost indefinitely. And that's kind of what we're doing with cards like this in Magic, especially in the late game when mana is not an issue. We can just cast a card, draw a card, and keep our hand stocked. Permission spells, such as counterspells, are another way that you can help preserve or push a tempo advantage. However, they will not help you gain tempo. Permission spells are reactive cards that require you to leave mana open. So in the early game, you're not progressing your board state. If it's turn 2 and this is the only 2 mana spell you have, you need to be prepared to counter whatever it is your opponent casts, because that wasted mana, that wasted turn, will put you further behind on tempo than losing the card will. So if you can't gain tempo, at least you can prevent your opponent from gaining tempo as well. Now in the late game, permission spells have a much different role. Because your mana will almost always be open anyway. So holding up mana for something like Artistic Refusal gives you the option to be patient and wait for the best timing to cast your permission spell. So it gives you the opportunity to spoil your opponent's combat trick. If they're about to make their 3/3 into a 5/5 that's going to kill your 4/4, boom, counterspell, it doesn't happen. Your opponent loses the creature instead of you. And so you can keep the tempo or even turn it back into your favor. Another type of spell that works differently whether you're in the early game or the late game is called a bounce spell. That is a spell like Athara's Dispersal that will return something to their owner's hand. Now these, unlike permission spells, are very good tempo plays. In the early game, they basically make your opponent lose their turn. They spent all their mana to cast this spell, they attack with it, you bounce it back to their hand, and now they have to take their turn over again. However, these are very bad for card advantage. Because you're returning the spell to your opponent's hand, they don't lose the card, whereas you have lost this instant. You're going to want to use your bounce spells when it would give you the best opportunity to push an immediate advantage. However, in the late game, you're going to be using your bounce spells more reactively. You are going to wait until your opponent casts a combat trick and then bounce the buffed attacker in response. So before they even become a 5/5, you can bounce them while they're still a 3/3, nothing happens. You could even play it in response to removal. If opponent is about to kill your creature, you could play Dispersal to bounce and return your creature to your hand, and then cast him again, because we're in the late game, mana generally isn't going to be an issue. And so Magic is really a game of balance. And if you want to bring this balance into your decks, you need to really think about the game in 2 stages. In the early game, you're going to focus on tempo. You're going to want to include creatures that you can cast early on turns 1 and 2 that you can attack in to pressure your opponent's life total. You want to make your opponent react in those early turns and push as much damage through as possible. Any permission spells or bounce spells you have in your hand, you need to use to keep your tempo advantage and to push that advantage into the late game. And as you transition into the late game, you're going to look to convert that early game tempo into card advantage through cards that have draw abilities. And you're going to incorporate into your deck different token producers that can help give you that card advantage even through the late game. You're going to hold your permission spells for the best possible opportunity to disrupt your opponent's game plan, and you're going to use your bounce spells reactively to either protect your board or stop your opponent's attack. And so these are the things we're going to keep in mind as we go into our gameplay footage and see if we can find these principles being used in practice. Alright, so we've got Swift Spear. I don't really have a turn 2 play. Well, maybe change the equation. But we've got Seed Shark and Zephyr Singer. This looks like an amazing hand. Alright, Swift Spear it is. And let's go ahead and start the aggro. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and drop our second Swift Spear. This is going to be a really stupid thing to do. I don't recommend. He's not blocking. Okay. Well, what I was going to do, which was really stupid, was whichever one he did block, I was going to bounce the other one to kill his creature. But now I don't have to, because he's just going to let the damage go through. Which means I probably should have held up the mana for Change the Equation, because now he's got a 4-drop. Oh, just a 3-drop? Okay. Oh boy. Alright. Well, he's got himself a board state now. So let's go ahead and drop our Shark. And see what opponent does. They're probably going to start getting on the aggressive now. Ooh. That's not good. That is a big boy. And Change the Equation doesn't even help me out on that because he's uncounterable. And I can only target him with green stuff. So I think I'm going to lose this one. Yeah. Alright, so there's Zephyr Singer, gives everything flying. And I've still got 1 blue up for dispersal. Of course, I'm probably just going to take a whole crap ton of damage here. Alright, that is actually fine for me. So yeah, that's a whole lot of triggers. And like I said, a whole lot of damage going through. So let's go ahead and make a block here. And then I can dispersal here. Oh shit, I should have dispersaled first, then I could have used my 1/1 to block with. But on the plus side, I'm not dead yet. I should have put the mountain first, that way I could have... God, I am just making all kinds of misplays today. So let's swing with him. I want to make sure that I still keep 5 mana. Yeah, that's good. That's all I'm going to do. And then we'll end turn. I'd rather use my 2 mana for a 3/3 than 2 1/1s. Oh, Jesus. I cannot counter that. because it has to be mana value 6 or less, and that costs 7. So I just got galted. Alright, yep, this is gonna hurt. Alright, so that's got trample, there's nothing I can do. That's got trample, there's nothing I can do. So my best bets is to block these 3/3s, take my 10, go down to 1. Alright. So this is going to look really weird. So we are going to cast Rouse Reinforcements. And then respond with Change the Equation. To counter Rouse Reinforcements. What that does is that is going to trigger Monastery Swift Spear's prowess twice to make those 3 power attackers. So now when I go to combat, I can swing out with everything, and that should be lethal. Damn. So yeah, as we saw there in that game, that early focus on tempo, getting the Swift Spears out to pressure the opponent's life total, to keep them kind of on the defensive there. I wasn't able to use my permission spells correctly, as in maintaining my tempo advantage. I was going to use my bounce spells to push advantage there on that second turn, but I didn't have to because the opponent didn't block. But then when we converted into our late game, our Seed Shark was able to get us some tokens. The Iconoclast was able to drop down some blockers, and so we were able to get that card advantage through our token producers. And then holding our permission spells for the best opportunity there at the end, when I could counter my own Rouse Reinforcements to trigger prowess twice on all of my flyers from Zephyr's Singer. The giving everything flying, that evasion was able to go around Galta, well not around, over top of a 12-12 trample, and oh man, yeah. So if you can find this balance in your deck between an early game tempo and late game card advantage, you are going to make yourself a really good deck that can honestly win some games out of nowhere. Man, I still can't believe that.